oftentimes tell people Jim Clyburn is like my political father. So if that's the case, that means Congressman Gregory Meeks is like my political uncle. Certainly, he is no stranger to many of you who have joined us here on this Friday. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a grandfather, HBCU graduate with a JD degree from Howard University, served as a district attorney at some point in his career, elected to the New York State House in 1993, served until 1998, elected to Congress in 1998, has been a force to be reckoned with since then, became the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus PAC in 2008, and this year, the year the Congressional Black Caucus celebrates 50 years of dedicated service to this country. He made history by being elected as the first African-American to chair the Foreign Affairs Committee. But all of that is great and it's good and it's wonderful. But the Chairman Greg Meeks, I know, is someone who, whenever you pick up the phone and call him, or whenever you need something from him, he's always there. And he has been such a great example for young Black men like myself to follow and look up to in this business. So I'm so proud to call him my friend, to call him the chair of our PAC, and now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Chairman, welcome to our Third Way Dialogue this Friday.
Good to be with you as always, Antjuan. Really, really good to be with you.
And certainly thank you to your incredible staff, Yolanda, Nakara, and Marissa, for making sure all this stuff worked out so we can have this conversation. We've had so much energy and so many people interested in tuning in. And so I want to definitely go ahead and unpack some real luggage here while I have you for a short period of time. Chairman, let's start with the obvious. I'm a Black man, 36 years old, from South Carolina. I know the text message I read from my mother when some of these things start to unfold, these shootings we saw around the country. And she always says, make sure you tell me you're okay when you get home. And I've been doing that now. Something I did as a kid. Ironically, I'm starting to do that now as an adult. From your perspective, you've seen Black men and women being mishandled, i.e. treated like a second-class citizen at the hands of law enforcement. And many of them, routine traffic stop have turned into routine funeral planning. What do you say to that, sir?
Well, I say that it shows that racism is very much alive in the United States of America, and the historic problems that we've had in America with policing exist in 2021, just as it existed in 1963, in 1950s, in the history from throughout. And fortunately, what I see that is happening and the similarities that I see to when I was a boy, actually, in 1963, 64, during the Civil Rights Movement, the only thing that made it change, and the genius to Dr. King, was it was caught on camera, the brutality that the police were performing on non-violent demonstrators, whether it was going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, whether it was sitting at a Woolworth counter. The American public, for the first time, was able to see with their own eyes, and their eyes didn't lie to them, what was taking place. And so many of these cases that we see now would have never been known by the American public, but for the fact that that young teenage girl decided to pull out her phone when George Floyd was being murdered, and the world saw what took place. And so now we've got to make sure, just as we pushed and fought to have civil rights laws passed and voting rights laws passed, we've now got to make sure that even though this police officer was convicted, we don't give up the fight and the struggle. We've got to go right back and make sure that we pass the George Floyd Police Reform Bill in the United States Congress. We passed it in the House. We're working on it in the Senate. We've got to make this become law. We've got to make sure that we are changing the way that policing has been done in America. You say you're 36. Well, I'm 66. And I still have the same kinds of deals, with my son. I don't have a son, but my son-in-law, I'm worried about them. And when I get pulled over by police, I make sure my windows are rolled down and my hands on the steering wheel, because I don't want to be mistaken either. So we've got a crucial problem that has been in America forever, and we got to continue to fight and to struggle to make sure that we change the policing in America.
Mr. Chairman, speaking of struggles, speaking of fight, I mentioned I'm 36. My grandparents were sharecroppers from rural South Carolina. I find myself having to discuss some of the same issues that they discussed in their day today. And so let's pivot for a second. Let's change lanes on the highway for a second and speak to issues and priorities, because oftentimes some things or priorities do not always make the priority list. So for you first, as a congressman from New York, what would you declare as some of your personal priorities in the 117th Congress?
Well, look, for me, in the Congress, I sit on two committees. As you've indicated, I'm the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I also sit on the Financial Services Committee. And for all of that period of time on the Financial Services Committee, it's been my role to fight for closing the wealth gap and the inequities that we have in small and medium businesses, getting more participation of folks on these boards, getting more access to capital, making sure that there is access to the American dream of home ownership that's done in a fair and impartial way. So I have been focused on the committee in doing just that. I've got a bill that just passed in the Financial Services Committee talking about diversity of financial institutions. And we also need to make sure that people know, a lot of whether it's the federal government, state government, municipal governments, even labor unions, et cetera, to invest, these pension funds that people pay into, a lot of that belongs to people that look like me and you, but none of that money, or very few of it, goes to be invested in communities where people like you and I live. So we've got to make sure that we change that paradigm. And so I'm focused on making sure that we are investing those dollars into the communities that need it most. So that's tremendously important to me. But of course, we all fight for, I used to be a DA. I think that you mentioned that also.
Yes, sir.
Criminal justice reform is at the top of our list. Housing inequities, top of our list. Education inequity. This pandemic has exposed what you and I already knew beforehand, because we talked about this in other presidential elections, the disparities that exist in our communities. So that is my focus. That is the focus of most of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And what I will say is beautiful about the Congressional Black Caucus in this regard, because we all have different areas of expertise because of the different committees that we sit on. So we've got record-breaking number of members who are full committee chairs. You mentioned me at Foreign Affairs, and I try to diversify and making sure that we get an opportunity there with reference to businesses also. But we got Bobby Scott, who's the chair of education. So he's focused on the education. You got Eddie Bernice Johnson, who's the chair of science and technology. And so she's leading a way there. You got Benny Thompson, who's chair of Homeland Security. So he is moving in that way. You've got Maxine Waters, who's chair of Financial Services. And so she has that movement. You have David Scott, who's chair of Agriculture. So we are now in a position to make sure that not only are the issues that are important to us individually are being had by all, but by leading these committees, because then you have about another 32 members of the Congressional Black Caucus that are chairs of major subcommittees. So we're leading these committees so that we can make sure that the issues of diversity in across every line becomes the attention and the focus of this country like it's never had before.
Mr. Chairman, that modern day hip hop philosopher from New York by the name of Jay-Z says, concrete jungle where dreams are made of, there's nothing you can't do. if you're from New York, you are the first African-American to chair the Foreign Affairs Committee. As I said in my brief introduction, ironically, it came during the 50th year of the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus. What does that mean for you? Because it's been a marathon, not a sprint to get here. And some would argue direction has been more important than speed. What does that mean for you personally? And two, professionally, how would you frame up your priorities? And a third wing to that is for those who have made arguments in the past that people who look like you and I cannot speak to or about issues other than things that are quote unquote Black issues. You say what to that?
I say, look at Barack Obama, look at Kamala Harris, look at now Reverend Senator Warnock. I say, look at all of the issues that I just talked about as far as these committees are concerned. Those are not just African-American issues. Those are issues that deals with American issues and American inequality issues. So all of that is compacted into one. And me sitting on the Foreign Affairs Committee, number one, it's a tremendous responsibility. I want to change some of the dialogue that we might have had in the past and put at the top of the agenda things that were not on the agenda. For example, American foreign policy on the continent of Africa. We can change that. American foreign policy on the Western Hemisphere, whether it's Central and South America and the Caribbean. We can change that. American foreign policy in Europe. We can make sure that we're addressing those issues and the viewpoints that I have as the chair of the committee. I can tell that it changes the dialogue and we are able to push our nation forward and have a better relationship with other countries around the world, because where I'm coming to them now is not from a superiority complex, but from a complex of talking about a country that has had its weaknesses and in fact its prejudices throughout, but we're still battling to challenge and fight them. And I can tell you as a result, the relationships that I have established in the short time that I've been the chair, but even that I had before that, are becoming more defined and more results working with the Biden administration now and the Vice President Kamala Harris. So it opens doors that had been closed, and that's what this is really about: opening the doors that had been closed, and we can address issues. You know, what I also, Antjuan, what also shows the difference is that if you happen to be African American, you can represent more than African American people. If you look at, we got a historic number right now of approaching 60, close to 60 members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Start. And if you check out, almost half of them do not represent majority African American districts. In fact, some only have 5 or 10% African Americans in their districts. And they're representing those districts, and none of them lost their seat in the last election. So it just shows the breadth and the ability of us, you know, that happens to be individuals of African descent.
Mr. Chairman, I want to switch lanes again. You know, I drive a fast car in South Carolina, so we switch lanes very, very often. So I want to switch lanes to your role as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus PAC. Now, I remember in 2017, shortly after the whip's birthday, we were all sitting around the table talking about the 2018 midterms. And he said to me, he said, Meeks will be a critical play caller and whether or not we have success in the 2018 midterms. Well, we did. A record number of Congressional Black Caucus members were elected, a record number of women, perhaps the most consequential midterm election of my lifetime. You were the chief play caller from the PAC. How important is the Congressional Black Caucus PAC to the to the ecosystem that we all exist in and helping elect more Democrats?
Is extremely, extremely important. You know, look, number one, you got to be able to play in the game. And thanks to members of the CBC PAC and the general public, last cycle, we raised a historic $13 million. And with the war chest that we were able to support, you know, a lot of our vulnerable members, and as you indicated, increase the number of CBC members. Why is that important? Is important because it determines, if you have the majority, who are chairs and who are ranking members and what the policies are set, who the speaker is. And so we were able to go into that arena and get on the ground and work hard to get individuals elected. And what we did, you know, based upon what you've talked about earlier, we support, of course, all of our CBC members as well as a number of CBC candidates, but we support more than CBC members.
Absolutely.
Individuals who have the same policies and thought patterns that we do, as well as those that will put us over so that we can win the majority. So we supported and endorsed over 60 incumbent and candidate campaigns, not only in the House, but also in the Senate. And many of those districts were the most challenging districts with very narrow numbers in them. So, for example, in some of these seats where there was, I talked about 10%, that 10% of turnout of African-American communities can make a difference between a Democrat and a Republican winning. And so we work very closely to get that done. Yeah, and I just want to just show the example of how important these elections are, even in relation to George Floyd, and not only voting on the congressional level, but our former CBC member, Keith Ellison, you know, we supported him in a big way to become the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. Had he not been the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, that vigorous prosecution that you saw to take place there would not have happened. So getting involved in those elections are tremendously important. That's what we look at to figure out how we help our CBC members grow to be hopefully soon some governors, but attorney generals and on a statewide level. So we're working in that regard. It's very important. So in getting our agenda out now under the auspices of the chair of the CBC in general, Joyce Beatty, it's the PAC's job to make sure we don't wait till just a month or two before the election. We're on the ground now. We're getting out into, you know, I'm South Carolinian roots also. I just want you to know about those changing lanes and fast cars. But we're getting out there now into communities to spread our message. We're making the relationships, whether it's with in the barber shops and beauty shops, whether it's in the churches and the civic groups, or just hanging out on the basketball courts to talk about the significance and importance of being engaged in politics and what it means and what the Congressional Black Caucus is in fact doing and what our agenda is.
I want to stay there for a second. I said that 18 I thought was the most consequential, and it was at the time. The 20 election we know was pivotal. The 2022 election, perhaps, and I said this to a reporter yesterday, perhaps in my mind may be more consequential than the 18 election. How will the PAC prepare for that? What are you doing to prepare for that? And can you add some background color to how important the 2022 midterms will be? Forget about for the country, forget about for New York, forget about for South Carolina, forget about for the CBC, for the world.
Well, brother, look, we learned early in 2020, in the 2020 election, that the minority vote share continues to increase and that the young African-American voters surged and that Joe Biden overwhelmingly won those voters. And those, we could see the difference in the 2020 election from the 2016 election in that regard. So as we engage in 2022, let's see what's at stake. Let's talk about what's at stake.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, we see the Biden administration already talking about having some version of oversight within the state police departments. We see that he's talking about ending the disparities that I mentioned earlier. And he had to override the policies of the last 4 years of the previous administration. So in 2022, we generally don't come out to vote
Mm-hmm.
the numbers that we do in a presidential election. What happened in 2010, when we didn't come out to vote in the same numbers that we came out in 2008, we lost the House. And then a lot of the agenda of President Obama that he wanted to move forward was not able to be executed because it was blocked by members of the House and the Senate. Well, that's at stake in 2022. Who controls the House? Who controls the Senate is at stake in 2022. That then determines, for example, on my viewpoint, talking about foreign policy, we had stepped away from the table. We pulled
Mm-hmm.
out of the WHO. We pulled out of the Paris Agreement. We pulled out of working in multilateral coalitions. And that put us on the brink as a nation of going to war on a continuous basis. It put us on a brink as a nation of having the kind of hatred that we saw take place. In fact, at the insurrection that took place on January the 6th, separation of the government, all of that is at play when we get into 2022. This is something that that questions the 2022 election, and I say each time it's the most important election of a lifetime because it is. It's a
Mm-hmm.
choice whether we're going to push forward and become a more perfect union or regress to go back to where we don't want to be in the past. That's all at stake in the 2022 election. So, and that's why the CBC PAC is not waiting to 2022. That's why we've got to get on the ground and start talking. That's why what you're doing now, Antjuan, bringing people together, having these dialogues and conversations are important. And it's important, and I should also say for me and the CBC, not just for us it's important for us to listen to you. It's important for us to get on the ground, and I learned so much while we were on the ground from your generation and younger, because that's what makes change. I just think that's, and you're building on that now. I just think, I don't want to regress, but I think of myself when I was your age and younger, and I think of John Lewis when he started. He was 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That what makes the difference. You and your generation are changing things, and all of that's on the line in 2022.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can tell you what, high touch has never lost an election in my mind. So I'm so happy to hear that the PAC is going to continue to do what it's always done, and that's playing ball at a local level. Because when you play local, you stay local, you win local. And as Cedric Richmond always says, you cannot govern if you do not win. And so we have to win these elections. I want to talk about for something that continues to be a topic of conversation, both downstream and upstream, in the Democratic ecosystem, and that's the importance of recruiting and electing candidates of color. But also, you've done a hell of a job, excuse my Sunday school language, of making certain that staffers, consultants, and also make sure they are at the table and not on the menu. Can you speak to and about why all three of those things are so important?
Well, look, number one, candidate recruitment is absolutely important. And so in order to do that, you generally have to have a political director who's on the ground and working. And at the CBC PAC, I don't know if everybody should know Nakara if they don't. She's on the ground.
Oh Lord, we know Nakara.
And this is, and this is our first full cycle with a political director, who now can work and make sure that she's also on the ground talking to the DCCC and others, and making sure that our input is in there and that we are looking and recommending candidates on the ground. So that is tremendously important what we're doing, and getting young people into making sure young people of color are on our staffs, but on the staffs of the DCCC, the DSCC. We've got a brother from South Carolina who now chairs the DNC.
Oh yeah.
You know, Jamie is going to do his piece. That's all important. We got, you know, Mark Vesey, for example, and Joe Neguse are now chairing the candidate recruitment at the DCCC, and they will work with Nakara and our team to make sure that we keep diverse candidates as a priority. So it is clear that the membership of the CBC and the CBC PAC and the connection with you and other civic organizations, local community organizations, the church, the sororities and fraternities is absolutely key to our success and to moving forward in these next few elections. And we got to stay focused on the Senate also. You know, in just 2 years, Rev has to run for re-election. And we've got to make sure that that 50-50 number, that we can increase it and try to get to a better point there to make it easier to get out the votes that we pass in the House out of the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, still staying in the politics lane for a second. You know, I caught hell for saying this right after the 2016 election. Now all of a sudden everybody's catching up. Black men, I argue, going forward will be the most consequential voting bloc in the country. We saw 13% voted for President Trump in the first election. Although we were able to get across the finish line first with President Biden and Vice President Harris this last election, the vote share increased. From your strategic thought or thinking, what can we do as Democrats to make sure there's no further erosion with such a critical constituency like African-American men?
Look, you see 43 states right now trying to change the voting rights laws. Mm-hmm. It's critical that we don't allow that to happen. And the reason why they're doing it is because they know that the number of African Americans and young men is increasing. And so this is where this fight is. And then we got to hold corporate America and others accountable, where you see these states that want to regress in these voting rights laws. And that's what you see taking place also right now. Look, in my estimation, and I always think that history is always a guide. You know, your political father, Jim Clyburn, always talks about history. He always relates what took place in the past, because if you allow it, history could repeat itself. But if you're aware of it, you can prevent history from repeating itself. That's why we can't jump for joy when we win a single victory. Because if you go back to history, right after Reconstruction, or during what caused Reconstruction, we thought that after the proclamation that liberated Black folks from slavery, that all was good and like rights would be equal. 10 years later, you had Plessy v. Ferguson, and all of the voting rights and that you thought you had won, all of the historic gains that you thought were made were literally wiped out because of an agreement that was made by two senators. We cannot let that happen again. We have to be focused on how we continue this struggle to make that difference in growing our majority and in growing our power and making this country better and saving it. That's what's at stake. And I think about, you mentioned Cedric Richmond. I think about what he's doing now in the administration as being real close to this president. I think about Marsha Fudge as Secretary of HUD and what she can do in regards to making sure that housing disparities begin and affordable housing happens. I think about even Pete Buttigieg, and he's talking about transportation and infrastructure. And if you do transportation and infrastructure, how we got to make sure it's all inclusive. So we're at a historic point. You're at a historic point. The camera of history is actually rolling right now, just as it did in the camera of history is rolling to see what did you do, what did we do at this critical point in our history, given all that's taken place over the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we going to do?
Mr. Chair, one of the last conversations I had with John Lewis, the late former Congressman John Lewis, by way of phone, and he said to me, and I never forget, he says, all we ever wanted in this country was oceans of justice and rivers of fairness. And we have to keep working our tails off until we get there. And I think you are certainly, in your roles, are helping us do that. I do want to pivot 1 second to Wednesday. For the first time, the president will address a joint Congress. For the first time in history, there will be 2 women standing behind him. One is a Black woman, and of course, one of the most influential women in world politics, I would imagine, with Speaker Pelosi. What do you expect to hear, and what do you want to hear from President Biden in his first State of the Union address?
I expect to hear President Biden talking about how he's bringing this country together again. We're the most divided nation. In the 22 years that I've been in Congress, we're more divided now than ever. So I expect to hear about his policies that's going to bring us together as a nation. I expect him to talk about how we've got to look at the disparities and the equities that he's talked about thus far. I expect him to talk about how to get rid of this and work together to make sure that this pandemic that we're in, we are out of it, that we've got to work together to make sure that everybody's vaccinated so that we can get back to health and talk about fixing the health disparities. I expect him to talk about the success of the $1.9 trillion that he used to make sure, as far as the stimulus bill that was passed, and how we're going to help small businesses get back and make sure that we own, there's equity with reference to ownership and access to capital. I expect him to talk about how we're going to reduce poverty in America, especially child poverty, in regards to the child tax credit that he's putting in the government to make sure that is making a difference for us in this country. I expect him to talk about how he is getting us back into multilateral organizations and how we're better off if we're part of the WHO, if we're part of the climate, because the climate is a big issue, if we're part and working with the UN and our partners there. I think that he will also be talking about why it's important as us as a nation to have one dialogue in that regards, and to figure out how we can work together to move this country's agenda forward. As he says, he's had over 30 years in the government, and he's got to talk about how he's going to make sure that he uses all of his experience and the power that he has in the office to move us forward. He's got to talk about immigration, of course, also, which is taking place right now, to make sure that's fair and that we deal with the root causes of some of the problems that we have there. So he's got a big agenda. And I think that he's going to try to cover a lot in this conversation to talk about the state of our union. And the state of our union right now is in better shape than what it was on January 20th at 12 noon, because he's already in a short period of time has made it put it in a better place. But we've got to make sure that we don't stop taking the precautions that he's been calling for with reference to vaccines to get rid of the pandemic. We don't give up and stop short of doing what we need to do with infrastructure and understanding the definition of infrastructure, not just transportation infrastructure, it's educational infrastructure, it's housing infrastructure, it's business infrastructure. So you're going to hear I think those are going to be the general themes of which I think he's going to be talking about on Wednesday.
Mr. Chairman, two more questions and I'll let you go because I don't want Nakara to beat me up or Marissa to be sending me a lot of emails saying I went over my time. But I mentioned this several times in our conversation, but the Congressional Black Caucus has been the conscience of the Congress, but also the conscience of the country. You chair the PAC. What does this 50th anniversary mean to you? And I laugh when I say 50 because I know one of the founders is Charlie Rangel, who I've had the privilege to drive around town during presidential cycles when he came to South Carolina and went on the road with him a good bit. And by the way, last time I saw him, he says, you have replaced him as the best dressed man in the Congress. The line from Lenox Avenue. But what does 50 years mean for you?
Not only is the Congressional Black Caucus the conscience of the Congress and thereby the conscience of the country, it represents, when you think of individuals who was brought to America in the hulls of slave ships through the door of no return, with all of the odds of crossing that Atlantic Ocean not being in their favor. It was the strength and the power of those individuals and the hopes and the dreams of those individuals that one day you would see a Congressional Black Caucus, and now 50 members strong, with major impacts on committees and in leadership. Jim Clyburn is the whip of the Congress. Hakeem Jeffries is the chair of the Democratic Caucus. Barbara Lee heads our major resource committee. It does show that America can be a better place, but it is going to be a better place because of those 50 men and women that are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, that is its conscience and the heartbeat of this Congress. We make America better. We've saved America. Saved it twice before in major ways, and this is the third time that we're going to indeed save America. Those 50 members of the Congressional Black Caucus standing on the shoulders of the original 9 is a testament to who we are as a people. And it shows that we've got to now build this country back, but not just the way it was. We got to build it back better. And I'm so proud and honored to be a member of that number.
What can people do to amplify and elevate and assist the work of the PAC? And I'll end with this question: how important is an organization or group like Third Way in helping us expand in the ecosystem?
Third Way is tremendously important. Working collectively together with Third Way and groups like Third Way helps us expand the message and get the message out there. We got to work, and no one works by him or herself. So we got to work in lockstep with Third Way, understanding, and Third Way can help us not only with messaging. Third Way can help us in communities and doing joint events together. I think that what Third Way and the United and the Congressional Black Caucus, we can move around the country together and deal with certain issues and certain webinars that's more specific to if it's the Judiciary Committee with the Judiciary Chair, if it's the Education Committee with the Educational Chair. We can and we need to network in that regards, and we then need to support each other financially, because that's important too, so that we can make sure that we have the resources that's necessary to get the work done that we need to get done. So I know with Marissa, Yolanda, and Nakara, they're going to be reaching out. Mm-hmm. They're going to be talking to you and wanting to work with you so that we can make a difference collectively. What this is all about, each one reach one, each one teach one. That's what this is all about. And that's why working with you and the collective PAC and others, so that we can make sure that we figure out everybody has a role to play, but we're coordinating in that role so that we are working and moving in the same direction. It's tremendously important. And I say that because of this. And sometimes people have different tactics, but it's still for us to work together. When I grew up as a kid, I think about Dr. King, of course, and then the folks up north talk about Malcolm X. Their goals were the same, and they were moving in the same direction. But talking to one another and working with one another, with their strategic end game being the same, is what we need to do right now. CBC and Third Way working together.
I'm fifth generation AME, so when we say we close and we really don't close, we always have one more thing. So I'll ask you this. Black people cast a survival vote in any given election. It's not even about thriving anymore. It's about survival. How important is the Black vote in any given election for the country?
The country would not be what the country is today without the Black vote. The Black vote is crucial. I use the example and I'll bring it up again. If you look, if Keith Ellison was not the Attorney General of Minnesota, think about that initial police report that was filed. Basically, it said that George Floyd was resisting an arrest, he was subdued, and he died. And there was no talk about arresting the police officer or charging him with anything. Fortunately, Keith Ellison took over the case, put the resources in the case, made sure that there was that this officer was appropriately charged. Folks, people of color sat on the jury because they voted. It makes a difference in every segment of our community and of this country. Voting is essential. I say to some folks, why do people come lobby me and other folks with a lot of money that don't look like me? Why do they do that? Because they want to make sure that their voices are heard and their issues are taken care of. And that's what this Black vote is all about. And because of it, you're hearing more people talking about issues that are important to us because you're in those streets. You're letting folks know that Black lives matter. If you weren't out there doing that, your voices wouldn't have been heard. It would have been just 50 members or 40 members of the CBC and nobody else. But your voices, the right to vote, gives us the strength and the power to put through bills that can make the difference. The power belongs to you and the voters, and we don't have it without you. The Congressional Black Caucus power is in the Black vote. We have none without you. And that's how important voting is and how important you are to this political process and to this country moving forward. Without it, we're nowhere. With it, there's no ceiling on us. And that's why we got to continue to do it and grow.
Concrete jungles, where dreams are made of, there's nothing you can't do when you're from New York. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your mentorship. And we appreciate what you have done to amplify the voices of so many people who have literally been, their voices have been suffocated in silence for so long. And in the words of John Lewis, we're going to keep the faith because of people like you. Thank you for joining us at Third Way.
And let's get in some good trouble. In the
necessary trouble.
Let's get some good trouble. Take care.
Thank you.